One of the best aspects of Monster Hunter is the sheer variety of ways to play the game. This is all thanks to the various weapons and sheer amount of builds and sets that you can create. So I'm Darcblade with the Anti-Alatreon build for the Charge Blade in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now the main purpose of an anti-build is to create a set that is made to counter a specific monster in the game. In this episode we're looking at countering Alatreon, providing hunters with two builds to take on the blazing black dragon. One safe, one risky. The Charge Blade is quite an effective weapon to use against Alatreon. However, you have to change the way you play slightly. To effectively take on Alatreon with the Charge Blade, you need to favour weapons with power element files and lean more towards the Savage Axe mode playstyle. Do this and you should easily be able to take on the blazing black dragon. So the first build I'd recommend is the risky Anti-Alatreon build. This build makes use of the entire Safi'jiiva armor set combined with the infamous Kiar Strong Arm Ice, which gives this build an incredibly high elemental rating. But it means we have to contend with a health drain. So for this build you'll need the Safi Crested Crown Beta, the Safi Crested Chest Beta, Safi Crested Van Braces Beta, Safi Crested Belt Beta, and the Safi Crested Boots Beta. I'm also using a Frost Charm 5, and for my weapon I'm using the Kiar Strong Arm Ice. This has a health regen augmentation and then elemental up augmentation. As for the custom mods, I've simply gone for increasing the weapon's elemental rating. You can of course use different elemental weapons if you wanted to, but the Kiar Strong Arm Ice is one of the strongest elemental charge blades out there. But it means that you're going to primarily be taking Alatreon on when it starts off in its fire phase. As for the specialist tools, these are down to personal preference. Anyway, as for the jewels, you have quite a few to play around with. First of all, we've gone for a Frost Jewel to max out the ice attack of this build. If you were using a different element, you would replace this to match whatever new element you were using. I've then gone for Vitality Jewels for the health boost skill, a Sharp Jewel for the Protective Polish skill, combined with a Hard Enduring Jewel for the Item Prolonger skill. I've then gone for Expert Jewels for some Critical Eye, Magazine Jewel for the Capacity Boost skill, Evasion Jewels for the Evade Window skill, and then finally the jewels on our mantles include Destroy Jewels for the Part Breaker skill and Protection Jewels for some Divine Blessing. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 1066 with white sharpness. You have 100% affinity when your weapon is drawn and the True Dragon Vein Awakening is in effect. You have an ice elemental rating of 1140. Again, this is taken into account the True Dragon Vein Awakening buff, and you'll have power element files. As for your defense, you have an OK defense of 1081 that is strong against every element except for dragon. As for the skills, first of all we'll have Critical Eye at level 7, increasing the base affinity of this build. You'll then have Ice Attack at level 6. Ice Attack increases the ice rating and damage of this build. Of course, if you were using a different elemental weapon, you would replace this to match whatever new element you were using. You've got Evade Window level 5, which increases our invincibility frames when we perform dodges. This is quite useful for the Charge Blade, as it allows us to quickly dodge via bunny hops and such, and then continue our assault. Evade Window at level 5 means that we can pretty much dodge most of Alatreon's attacks, except for its ultimate, quite effectively. Anyway, you have Health Boost level 3, allowing our health to get to a maximum of 200. You have Blight Resistance level 3, making us immune to all elemental blights from Alatreon. You have Crit Boost level 3. Crit Boost is a skill that increases the damage of our attacks when they crit a monster, but only applies to the raw portion of our attack. So in the case of this build, it would only apply to the attack value of the build, not the elemental portion. You have Item Prolonger level 3, which is a result of the Hard Enduring Jewel. Item Prolonger allows buffs from items to remain active for longer periods, but we've primarily taken this in conjunction with Protective Polish, which we'll talk about in a moment. You have Capacity Boost level 1, increasing the number of files we can have with this build. You have Guard level 1, which slightly increases our block capabilities. When the Charge Blade shield is charged up, having Guard at level 1 means that we can block most incoming attacks quite successfully with minimal knockback, to which we can follow up with a Guard reaction move. Anyway, you have Protected Polish level 1, which is a wonderful skill that allows us to put a protective coating over our sharpness gauge, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration of time after we've sharpened our weapon. And this does work in unison with Item Prolonger, allowing that protective polish coating to last a little bit longer. Anyway, next up is Critical Element level 1, increasing the elemental damage of our attacks when we crit a monster, so think of it like Crit Boost, but for that 1140 elemental rating. You also have Part Breaker level 2 when we're wearing our Glider Mantle, increasing the likelihood of breaking monster body parts. So when you're going for the horns, don't forget to put on the Glider Mantle, and you'll have Divine Blessing level 2 when wearing our mantles, giving us a small chance at taking reduced damage when we take a hit from a monster. Finally, for the set bonus, you have the Sappy Jiva Seal, True Dragon Vein Awakening. True Dragon Vein Awakening is a buff that kicks in whenever you have your weapon drawn. When in effect, it grants us 40% base affinity. It also grants us an additional 150 elemental rating, and if you were using an element weapon, it would also grant you 120 element rating. But there is a downside to this. Every time you swing with the weapon, it drains a small portion of your health, leaving a red portion of health on your health bar. This can put you at risk, as should the health drain be quite substantial and you take a hit from a monster, it can end up carting you. But should you constantly attack a monster and not get hit in between, then after enough consecutive hits, True Dragon Vein Awakening will heal you for the damage it drained. So a real risk reward set bonus there. So that is the risky Anti-Alatreon build I'd recommend with the Charge Blade. But of course, even the strongest builds out there have pros and cons. The biggest pro with this build is its high elemental damage. Thanks to the Kia Strong Arm Ice combined with the Sappy armor set, we have one of the highest elemental ratings in the game, meaning that we can easily power down Alatreon and complete the hunt. On top of that, this build comes with quite a few quality of life skills. From health boost, evade window, item prolonger, protective polish and guard, it all adds up and makes a hunt feel a little bit more easier than it is. And the final pro is the True Dragon Vein Awakening, providing a ton of DPS buffs, and it also means that we don't have to worry about weakness exploit whatsoever on this build, as we can easily get that 100% affinity. But there are cons. The biggest cons for this build include the True Dragon Vein Awakening health drain, which can leave us at risk of fainting. And the other con is, unfortunately, this build has sharpness issues. And whilst it's alleviated slightly with protective polish and item prolonger, it means that you're going to have to sharpen during a prolonged hunt, as is the case with the Alatreon hunt. But regardless of the cons, this is one of the strongest elemental builds out there, able to quickly power down Alatreon, especially when you face him when he starts in his fire form. This is also one of my personal favourite Anti-Alatreon builds to use against the monster. Which brings us on to the next build, which is the safe Anti-Alatreon Charge Blade build. This build is another strong elemental DPS build, but replaces the health drain found on the risky build with the Master's Touch skill, meaning that we don't have to worry about sharpness whatsoever with this build. So for this, you'll need the Kaiser Crown Beta, the Brachydium Mel Beta, Kaiser Vambraces Beta, Kaiser Coil Beta, and the Brachydium Greaves Beta. I'm also using a Blaze Charm 5, and for my weapon I'm using the Kia Strong Arm King. This has a health regen augmentation and elemental up augmentation, and then a combination of affinity and elemental increases when it comes to the custom upgrades. Of course, you can replace this for another elemental weapon if you so wish, but if you do, remember to also swap out the Blaze Charm to match whatever new element you are using. As for the specialist tools, these are down to personal preference. As for the jewels, again you've got quite a few to play around with, to which I've gone for Vitality jewels for the health boost skill. I've then gone for a Magazine jewel for capacity boost, Challenger jewels for the Agitator skill, Expert jewels for the critical eye skill, a Blaze jewel to max out the fire attack skill. Of course, if you were using a different element, you'd replace this jewel to match whatever new element you were using. Resistor jewels for some blight resistance, and then the jewels on the mantles, I've gone for protection and maintenance jewels. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which would be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 1102 with white sharpness. You have 50% base affinity, which can easily be 100% when you're taking into account weakness exploits as well. You have a elemental rating of 750 with power element files, and you have an OK defense of 1049 that is strong against fire, thunder and dragon, but unfortunately weak to water and ice. As for the skills, first up you have Agitator at level 7. Agitator is a skill that provides us a buff whenever a monster becomes enraged, increasing our raw attack as well as affinity. And as you can quite easily control when a monster becomes enraged, thanks to the flint shot in Iceborne, it means that this buff should be active for the majority of a hunt. Anyway, next up you have Fire Attack level 6, increasing the fire rating and damage of this build. Of course, as always, if you were using a different weapon with a different element, you would replace this to match whatever new element you were using. You have Critical Eye level 6, Health Boost level 3, Blight Resistance level 3, Weakness Exploit level 3. Weakness Exploit is a skill that increases our affinity whenever we're attacking monster weak points, and should these weak points be tenderized through Clutch Claw attacks first, this increase to our affinity is even greater. Weakness Exploit at level 3 can provide us a potential 50% extra affinity. Anyway, next up is Blast Attack level 2, a byproduct of the gear. It's not needed on this build whatsoever. You have Heat Guard level 1, another byproduct, but prevents any damage when you're in hot zones such as the lava zones in the Guiding Lands or Elder's Recess. You have Latent Power level 1, another byproduct, but it's a buff that kicks in whenever you've been fighting a monster for a set duration of time or you've taken enough damage from a monster. When this happens, Latent Power kicks in, providing us extra affinity as well as reduced stamina consumption. Anyway, you have Capacity Boost level 1, Critical Element level 1, and when we're wearing the mantles, again you'll have Divine Blessing level 2, and you'll have Tool Specialist level 2. Tool Specialist is a minor skill that reduces the cooldown on specialist tools. Anyway, as for the set bonuses, you'll have 2 of them. First of all is Teostra's Technique, Master's Touch, which is a skill that prevents any sharpness loss on our weapon whatsoever whenever we crit a monster. And as this build should be easily able to reach that 100% affinity, it means that you should be able to keep that white sharpness for the majority of a hunt. And then finally you have the Brachydios Wheel, Agitator Secret, allowing us to get the Agitator skill from level 5 to a maximum of level 7. So there we have it, that is the safe Anti-Alatreon build I'd recommend for the Charge Blade. But of course even this comes with pros and cons. The biggest pros for this build is its damage output, combining raw attack with elemental attack for a strong overall DPS output. The next pro is that this build has an incredibly high affinity rating, again adding to our overall DPS, and the final pro is that this build doesn't have to worry about sharpness loss whatsoever. Thanks to Master's Touch as well as that aforementioned high affinity, we should be able to keep the white sharpness on this build for the majority of a hunt. But unfortunately there are cons. Whilst this build has strong constant damage output that should be able to power down Alatreon quite effectively, it does lack a little bit when it comes to defensive skills, unfortunately. Lacking guard as well as evade window, you're going to have to be on your toes. But despite that, you should still be able to take a hit thanks to no health drain and increased health boost. And the final con is that unfortunately this build works best with QR weapons, which means that newer players may not have access to a large QR weapon collection, which means that the overall build may suffer a little bit. You can use a normal weapon if you so wish, and it should still be able to perform just fine, so long as it has high affinity and high elemental rating, but for optimal performance you need QR weapons. But regardless, if you're looking for a little bit more of a safe and stable offensive build to use against Alatreon, this is one I can recommend, and it's another one that can easily bring down the Blazing Black Dragon. So there we have it, those are 2 builds I can recommend for taking on Alatreon with the Charge Blade. Now of course, as you farm the monster more and more, you will get Alatreon gear and weaponry, which will allow you to take on the hunt a little bit more easily. This is because these weapons and gear have high elemental ratings and defenses, but until then, these builds will work just fine. So until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you Anti-Alatreon builds for the Charge Blade and Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.